I would like to welcome Julia Manske from the Stiftung Neue Verantwortung, where she works in open data and in the Open Data and Privacy Program, and Eva Blum-Dumontet. She's a research officer at Privacy International, where she investigates the surveillance industry. Welcome and have fun with the talk.
Thank you. Think about a city where trains are always on time and never crowded. A city where traffic jams are a foreign concept. Think about a zero-waste city where everything is recycled, where bins alert you if you throw your rubbish in the wrong place. Think about a city where you would only pay for the electricity you use. Think about a city where you can alert civil servants about what needs fixing in your streets, and you can monitor them in real time to make sure they get the job done. Think about a city where citizens aren't passively waiting for the next elections to make their voices heard, but are full-fledged actors who decide what's happening in their cities using their smartphones. Think about a city where internet access is available in every street and where even the most deprived among us can access it for free. Think about a city where elderly citizens can safely remain in their homes thanks to a system that alerts medical authorities if they show sign of blood drops or a heart attack. Think about a city where crime is prevented before it happens. Welcome to the city that companies like IBM, Cisco, Oracle, Hitachi, Google, and Microsoft are trying to sell your local governments. You'll notice some of them are here. Anyhow, so we've all heard the term smart cities, but what we mean by that is the use of technology and data collection to improve the city and provide tailored services for the needs of citizens. Now, smart cities have been focusing majorly on 4 aspects: transport, health, energy, and local governance. There are various ways of collecting data, but really there are 2 emerging trends. One is, of course, the use of your smartphones. The other one is sensors. And actually, it's fair to say that we are moving on to an area of sensors where they are placed all over the city, but also in your homes and most definitely in your smartphones. So, yeah, IBM actually has a helpful analogy. They compare it to the nervous system, where the sensors are actually the nerves. But while nerves relay information to the brain, unfortunately, and that's definitely one of the major concerns I'd like to already point to in terms of smart cities, is that it's not entirely clear what the brain is in a smart city. Now, every day, we produce we produce 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, which is an enormous quantity of information and data that can be collected about us. We are actually entering an Internet of Things era where the objects you carry, like your watch, or the objects in your house, like your fridge or your children's toys, are themselves equipped with sensors and connected to the internet, and therefore relaying your data and information that can be accessed by private companies and governments. Now, Europe is the top continent in terms of smart cities, and I live in London, which is really at the forefront of Smart Cities Initiative. So just to give you an idea of what it means to live in a smart city, and this is nothing new, this is something that has been going on for the past almost 15 years now. When you take public transport, be it the underground or buses, you need an Oyster card. An Oyster card is equipped with a circuit, which means that every time you enter public transport or every time you leave, you have to swipe it. And this data about where you're going from and where you're going to is collected by Transport for London. Again, is accessible by the government. But it's not just public transports, obviously, that are being monitored. It's also just, cars as well. When you're driving through London, you need to pay congestion charge. So in order for that charge to be, for that tax to be paid, the City of London has called IBM to set up a system where cars are constantly monitored based on their number plates. Now, as I said, this has been going on for maybe like up to 15 years. And smart cities are there, they already exist, and they are there to stay. But today we want to tell you about the risk of smart cities to maybe hope and see how we can mitigate them as well. I've spoken about Europe, but it's in London, but it's definitely not only limited to Europe. Actually, it's really a growing trend in transforming countries as well. With China and India are developing 300 smart city pilots. Because the more mega cities are popping up, the more the urbanization trends leads to smart city developments.
So we are very aware of the fact that there are, of course, a lot of bottom-up initiatives as well that are popping up now in the discourse about smart cities. And there are a lot of interesting civic hack projects, for instance, and open data projects. But we really want to focus on this very much technocratic top-down approach that we see promoted by the big tech players. And we want to focus on the questions related to power and control, and the challenges that we see for open and free societies, especially in the context of privacy and surveillance. And why do we want to have this conversation? Because we have the feeling that right now, this fight about smart cities is very much a fight fought by urban planners who are very much fighting against the big tech companies, and then the tech companies on the other side. And we believe that actually the crowd here at the Republica should also be engaged in these discussions. So let's start with the question of who's in control and in power of smart cities and who actually benefits from smart cities. So Eva already explained all the players, and there are more, who are interested and really pushing and promoting the idea of a smart city. But there are also cloud service providers, application platforms, device manufacturers, data analysts, or some of these companies, of course, they provide all of these services at the same time. And there's this really interesting book by a researcher called Anthony Townsend, written in 2013, where he is analyzing the advent of the smart city, showing that around the year of 2008, the notion and the project and the whole enthusiasm behind smart cities increased. And this is for two reasons. First of all, because for the first time, more people were living in urban areas than in rural areas. So we were facing more and more challenges in the context of urbanization, like poverty, traffic, and environmental issues. But at the same time, 2008, and all of you know it, was also the year of the financial crisis. So a lot of the big IT players, they weren't able to sell their services and solutions to other enterprises anymore because they ran out of money or had a lot of budget cuts. So of course, these companies were looking for new markets and trying to sell their services that were actually designed for enterprises. And so indeed, this is the estimated market by 2020 for smart city technology, and it's estimated to be at around $408 billion. And we're just trying to explain that to show you how much the discourse was driven by the private sector and actually shaped by these providers. And also promoting the idea that technology and data-driven approaches are needed for cities to become successful or efficient. And I want to look a bit closer now at 4 issues why we think that is problematic. So first of all, the problem with cities most often is that they really lack resources, no? And this is especially the case in developing countries or in the global south. And Eva already mentioned that especially in China or India, cities are now getting very engaged in these smart city projects. But many times there's just no budget. So they are very much forced into private-public partnerships because they couldn't afford it with public money. And so now, I mean, those are 2 cities that have a lot of budget, but here we see the announcement from New York, where the city of New York is cooperating with Microsoft, setting up this new domain awareness system, which is a really elaborated law enforcement system, using data from surveillance cameras, using data from automated license plates rates, and those are long-term contracts where Microsoft is getting engaged with the city. Here on the other side, we have the city of Hamburg signing a memorandum of understanding for the port in Hamburg to make it more efficient and use transport data, logistic data, etc. So the problem here is just that these contracts, they are really long-term contracts that bind the cities to these special providers. But the other thing, and this I find even more striking, is that one of the problems is that, well, generally in the government, but especially in the local government, you have a lack of capacity and knowledge to assess what kind of technology is actually needed to tackle certain problems on the city level. So this is from a blog post from Cisco, which I find kind of funny because it's the trash talking, what is your city's digital transformation IQ, so this notion that your city needs to have a certain IQ to be innovative, and that probably trash or smart trash systems are the right answers. And while I agree that sometimes trash is an issue, probably we should ask the question whether this is always the biggest problem a city is facing. So here we really have the providers shaping the agenda and also providing the problem and providing the technology at the same time, while people on the government level cannot really act as sort of smart clients assessing the problems and then assessing the suitable solution. The other problem that we are seeing is that in a smart city context, data government and data management becomes really, really important. And here we have the fascinating example of Rio. So Rio applied for the World Cup and Olympics, and when it was finally announced that both of these events will take place in Rio, or will take place in Brazil and in Rio, of course, they were realizing that there are a lot of issues and problems the city is facing. So ranging from poverty, over traffic jams, over natural disasters, especially in the favela regions. So the mayor of Rio turned to IBM and asked for a technical solution. And what he got was this control room. And I think it's a very impressive example of showing the idea behind the smart city. So you have like the centralized system of data of all different sectors. So here you have data of more than 30 agencies coming in together in real time. You have these city workers having the screens and the real-time maps using sensors and all kinds of other data and really controlling, or at least this notion of being able to control the city and probably even the citizens. Because what's really important in the smart city is that you have these sectors and the data flows in between the sectors. So ideally, the energy system knows what the transport system is doing, etc. But this poses certain questions, because if you have this kind of centralized proprietary system, as I said earlier, you're bound to certain contracts. You need one service provider and hardware provider providing this kind of control rooms. This, of course, neglects any kind of bottom-up approaches, but also, for example, the idea of sharing data openly or of engaging with startups or other more innovative approaches, but you're really forced into these systems. The other question, so I already talked about the lack of resources and capacity, the data management question. The third one is the one about data ownership. And I think this is a very crucial one, and Eva will touch upon that in a second as well. So the whole idea of who's actually owning the data for a long time has been neglected. And we see that now in contracts between the public sector and the private sector, that many people have not really thought about this question, and now the public sector wants to have access to the data, or maybe even wants to make it openly available, but they can't because the data belongs to the private sector. And this is an issue for several reasons. One, because this data could be made freely available more for, if it's non-personal data, more for example, the use of citizens as part of open data projects. But the other one is also, and this is from a quote from a white paper of the Department for Business and Innovation Skills in the UK, where they are really promoting this idea of selling data that is generated in a smart city context for advertisement purposes. So the idea of having this perfectly tailored advertisement for people commuting in the city, for instance. And if you have approaches like this, you can already imagine the next step, and that is probably that this data is used by the big data brokers who are selling the data, and they can sell them to insurance companies, to the banking industry, etc. So here you can imagine, well, if the data is maybe allowing tailorized advertisement for people commuting to a bar, this kind of data will also be used to know, okay, how often does a person go to a bar, etc. And I don't know if you want this. And now the last point that I want to make about power and control, I don't know, I think most of you know this building or this city. And actually, it was Walt Disney who had this really elaborated idea of the smart city. So he had a very technocratic approach. It was called Epcot, which the city was called Epcot, his original idea, which is called, which meant experimental prototyping community of tomorrow. And here he really wanted to have technology in place, but more importantly, he also had the idea that you don't need any local government anymore, but you have the private companies, so in that case Walt Disney and the corporate partners managing the city. So in terms of democracy and free and open societies, I think there is a lot of reason to worry about this, and we heard about the problems that occur when you just have technology and algorithms ruling and designing a community. We heard about this yesterday with Kate Crawford, but also today there were great talks explaining why it's really important that we do not just have algorithms and data sort of designing the society, but that we need transparency about the algorithms that are used, about potential issues of exclusion and biases in the data, because otherwise we cannot hold our government or whoever controls us to account. So I'll give over to Eva again to talk a bit more about the issue of algorithms and surveillance in the smart city concept.
So I'd like actually to talk a little more about privacy, because actually one thing you notice when you hear people from local governments and companies that are selling smart cities, what I would call the smart city evangelist, is that they complain often about the issues around privacy and data protection, and how data protection laws get in the way of progress, and how we need data to save children's lives, and basically privacy is just getting in the way, really. So before we move on from the right to privacy, and before we dismiss it as a right from the old world, I'd just like you to take a minute and think about what it means to live in a smart city. Basically, what it means to live in the world we live in now, where the government knows when you're going to bed, when you wake up in the morning, if you take a shower or a bath, when you're leaving your house, where are you going to? Living in a world where the governments use your social media posts to assess whether you're happy with the service they're providing. Now, data protection historically has always been tied to the issue of consent. When you're using Facebook or Twitter, you have to tick a box saying you consent to your data being used. And if you don't consent, if you're not happy with it, you just don't use the services. That's why I'm not on Facebook, for example. Now, obviously, in a smart city, the issue of consent disappears. When the moment you step out in the streets or the moment you drive through a city, your data is being used and being sucked out from your phone, you don't get to consent to it. Now, I think one interesting example is actually, so the smart bins in London. So what were the smart bins? Basically, they were just bins with broadcasting advertisements. Now, the trick is that they were equipped with sensors that were getting data from your phone when you pass by. And based on the data they were getting, which was essentially your MAC address, they would target the advertisement for you. Now, when people weren't aware of this happening at all, they just thought it was random advertisement. They didn't realize it was targeted advertisement. When people found out, it caused like a proper outcry in London, and it was a newspaper that exposed this. And people, well, demanded the project to stop, and eventually it was stopped. Now, I think one of the things that was interesting is the CEO of Renew, the startup that had proposed the smart bin, says, I don't see what the problem is. London's already the most surveilled city in the world. Why do people suddenly care about this? I think it shows one thing. When people get angry, you can still get a say as to what data are being intercepted. So it's never too late, even if you're in the most surveilled city in the world. Now, smart cities isn't just about the constant data collection. We've talked about Rio already, and I think it's a good example to show the other side of the problem, which is the centralization of data. In Rio, you get data from 30 companies, from sensors, from CCTV, all in one place, and all used to create like real-time maps and graphs to predict and counteract crimes or traffic jams and natural disasters. Now, I think this was a really interesting quote from the mayor of Rio, who says, the operation centers allows us to have people looking into every corner of the city 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I think that really shows the extent of the problem. Now, Rio is not the exception. And actually, to be fair, it is going to become the norm if smart cities keep on as they are. Another example is the city of Singapore, where there is an unprecedented project currently being laid out, where an undetermined number of sensors and cameras are being placed all over the city to monitor everything from cleanliness of public spaces to density of crowd and precise movement of every locally registered vehicle. Now, all this data is filled into one program called Virtual Singapore. And what it means is that the government will be able to run experiments, for example, to see how people would react to an explosion or how infectious disease would spread. Now, let's say you're fine with this. Let's say you're fine with government surveillance, because after all, you've elected the government, so you've chosen it, maybe you trust them. There's still an issue that remains to be solved, which is the problem of cybersecurity. Let's think for a moment what have been the big headlines lately. A telecommunications company like TalkTalk have been hacked and all their data have been leaked. Everyone has heard about the Ashley Madison hack. Actually, even governments are being hacked. The Turkish government, the Filipino government, the Mexico government have been victims of hacking and have seen their data leaks. So how can we trust, how can we possibly trust pacemakers, sensors, everything that we rely on in our day-to-day lives, that we let in intimacy, when actually we are not even capable of securing the most basic system? Now, this is actually an example of the Wi-Fi of London. The Wi-Fi of London is actually specifically in the City of London, which is the financial district. You would think that in the financial district, where all the banks and all the major headquarters of company are concentrated, surely you would think they would manage to have a secure network. Now, we've actually made research on this. We've been studying the networks. The networks is completely insecure. If you're connecting onto the London Wi-Fi, you can very easily intercept communication and internet traffic from other people connected to this Wi-Fi. And let's just think about what it means actually to have sensors everywhere. When you think about sensors, for example, that are placed to recognize if there's been gunshot, for example. So those sensors are normally designed to intercept sounds. Well, what if someone maliciously get in the way and use them to intercept conversations that are happening in streets, for example? Now, I'd like to conclude. I'd like to actually conclude on the issue of forced participation in smart cities, and because I think there is something to keep in mind is that when the right to privacy was coined in 1890s in the US by Brandeis and Warren, it was defined as the right to be left alone. And this is exactly what we're losing in a smart city. we are losing the right to be left alone, because we are constantly, as I said, like your data are constantly being used, but also more and more we see projects being developed where your government is expecting you to use apps, for example, to report graffitis or holes in the road. So if you don't want to do that, if you want to stay away from those apps, for example, the services you get from the city are just not as good. You're being penalized for not participating. So by essence, you are being constantly requested, expected to participate. Now, the reason there is a picture of Walt Disney on the screen is to go back to this idea of this smart city that Walt Disney had envisioned, because there was a flip side to it, is that yes, it was the most efficient city, possibly using technologies for everything, from like taking your kids to school, from where you work, everything you do would be facilitated by technology. Now the flip side to it is that it was a city where you couldn't retire. The moment you were retired, you would be kicked out of the city because the city expected you to be efficient. And that's what I want you to ask yourself as well. Do we want to live in a city where we are constantly forced to be efficient?
And now just to give like a more positive outlook at the end. So reclaiming the free and open city. So we talked a lot about Rio and the control room and the partnership between IBM and the government in Rio. Okay, this is not so positive and unfortunately a bit blurry, but this is from this March, and probably you've heard about all the protests going on in Brazil at the moment, and this is actually in Rio. So here you can see that, well, Rio might be a smart city or whatever, however you want to define a smart city, but we see that like the biggest issues and challenges that we are facing at the moment, like poverty, like social injustice, like corruption or public education, like probably there aren't really technological fixes to that. But of course we need human interaction and democracy and collective human intelligence in a way. And we definitely need to involve cities, day-to-day cities, everyday citizens in these solutions that are developed. And we heard this yesterday from Richard Zenit, where he explained, well, the best cities, those are not the cities that are very efficient, but the cities that are very dynamic and that have a lot of interaction between communities. So this, another example from Latin America, is the city of Medellin. And Medellin, maybe you've heard about the city because it was had a lot of, in Colombia, by the way, it had a lot of problems with the drug war, and a lot of issues with the slum areas in these mountain regions. And the solution that they found to these issues had nothing to do with an app or a smartphone, but what they did is that they had publicly funded sports facilities for people in the slums and people in the central area, and they built these cable cars connecting the slums with the center of the city. So in the end, it was the interaction of these different communities coming together that made the city a better place. Now, Eva already said that we know that the idea of a smart city and technology driving these developments is nothing that we are going to stop. This is just happening at the moment, but we really see an urge to shape these developments and to get engaged in the debates. And if there are technological solutions implemented, which is not necessarily a bad thing, we need to make it more transparent and open. We need to think about where we can work with open source technologies, and especially we need to think about policies and regulations on who owns the data and what will be done with the data. Because in the end, there will be always inequalities in a society, and there will be always inequalities in a city. But this needs to be made transparent, and we should not believe that just because we use data or algorithms, we will find the best solution. But we need to be able to hold companies and the governments using this kind of data to account. And well, if some people say that now the Internet of Things, and this will be like the underlying system of any smart city, will be like electricity, then we should certainly think about the question, who is in charge of this new infrastructure and who is in control, and does it really serve free and open societies? So, and we hope you get engaged in the discussion about these issues. And thanks a lot.
You